Welcome to my video game theme talk about the generative AI product market with a very specific focus on venture capital. I'm calling this LLM Valley after one of my favorite video games, Stardew Valley. We're going to look through this allegory journey. We're going to meet different players in the space, what their builds look like, and how you can play like them if you want. So first off is we have to pick our game. There's basically 4 categories of games within generative AI. I'm going to just kind of give you a little bit of an overview of each game, and then we're going to talk more in detail on the next slides about like what those companies look like, what are they doing, what are their weaknesses, what are their strengths. So starting off, we have B2B SaaS, business to business software as a service. This is basically every Y Combinator company. Every Y Combinator company this summer can essentially fit into this category. So the idea is that an LLM can be somehow leveraged to solve a major business problem with more efficiency than the previous incumbents. A good example of this is writing cold emails. Businesses have to do it. They are typically pretty bad at it. Think about the last time you truly read a cold email. And what AI can do is they can write better ones. They can write better personalized cold emails to you that you're more likely to open. So that's how a company, backed by Y Combinator would probably pitch themselves. You're going to increase your cold email click rate by 20%, which will increase your total sales by 3%. So you should pay us 1%. That's a pretty classical B2B sales pitch. The next category is B2C, or business to consumers. These are the transform a regular photo into a professional headshot for $10. It's going to sound something like that. They oftentimes have a freemium model with a very, very low price point. Their use case may be that specific. It may be that specific about headshots. It could be more broad, but the market for sure is broad. So a really great example of B2C is actually ChatGPT. ChatGPT is something that theoretically anybody can use. And for $10 a month, I think it's 10, it might be 20. For however so many dollars a month, you can ask it more questions. And it's not really a specific use case. You can just do it. Another example is Midjourney's Discord bot. Those are both B2C markets. Open source. The best example of open source is LangChain. You've probably heard of it if you're a developer, if you're in the AI space at all. LangChain was one of those GitHub repos that started off as just, I think, a project for somebody, and then it just massively took off. I think they've now raised a pretty massive venture round. But the gist is the model for open source is getting developers to build on top of your solution. And then if there's a lot of things being built with your solution, you are now a company. Again, a lot of the Y Combinator cohort is actually kind of a wrapper on LangChain. And so if you look in their summer cohort, you'll find plenty. The most well-known game of all are the foundation games. You've probably heard of them. That's OpenAI, Midjourney, Anthropic, Cohere. They train the models. They're the big boys. There's a limited number of them to choose from. So those are the 4 games. We're going to deep dive right now into B2B SaaS. I think one thing that's super helpful for thinking about AI is actually thinking about industries that aren't tech. I know we're all in tech. We always think about software, but I want to talk actually about a different industry, healthcare. Because healthcare also buys software, right? Like all industries buy software at this point. But I think that there's a really great example of how B2B SaaS with AI is playing out in the healthcare industry. So on the left here, we have Epic EHR. You've probably used it, whether you know it or not. You've probably been a part of the Epic EHR system. If you've ever been to a hospital, if you've ever been to any type of doctor in a major American city, caveat American, this is only going to be about American healthcare. I apologize to my international folks. If you've ever been to one, you have been a part of this system. They make something called MyChart, which is how you interact as a patient with the doctors. You might request a refill. You might look at your notes. You might make new appointments. That's what an electronic health record system looks like. They are so big, I've never actually seen anybody use anything else. I'm almost certain it's pretty much a monopoly at this point. However, integrating AI into something like that, like a pre-existing software, can be tricky. And Epic has all the resources. They are a massive company. They actually announced a partnership with Microsoft. It's called Epic and Microsoft Bring GPT-4 to EHRs. You can look it up on their blog. They did do that, but they're so big and so many hospitals rely on them for day-to-day communication that if they were to massively overhaul part of their product to incorporate AI, that actually might end up being really bad for them. They have these existing contracts, millions of dollars on the line, lives even on the line. So it's not actually that easy for a massive company like Epic to integrate AI into their existing product. So that brings us to our challenger, Notable Health. This is a startup that I just sort of found when I was searching. So apologies if I'm just kind of calling you out here. But Notable Health, based on their landing page, looks like they are reimagining what an EHR looks like with AI. So a really great example of this is my parents are always asking me to book stuff for them, right? Like parents, grandmas, they just like need your help with like making doctor's appointments, getting their prescription, just doing like day-to-day healthcare stuff. Why? It's because like something like Epic's EHR, MyChart is actually really confusing to navigate if you're an older person. If you didn't grow up with like certain interfaces, that's really hard. But you know what's really intuitive is actually a chat-based interface. Anybody can talk to anybody, right? Like that's why your parents might actually prefer to call to make appointments as opposed to make one online. So Notable Health puts an AI layer in front of all the things that you might want to do on Epic's system, but now it's a friendly chat layer. It's something that even your parents can use. It's so straightforward. And so in this battle between Notable Health and Epic, there's pros and cons to each. Notable Health, as a smallish startup, is going to have the ability to be really nimble. They're going to be able to really think about what the UI should look like from the ground up, where AI is not an afterthought, but the core reason the product exists. On the other hand, if you're Epic, you have literally Microsoft backing you. You can just call up Microsoft and be like, help. That's a really big advantage. That means that you might not be limited by things like, I don't know, rate limits, wait lists. You might have access to the newest, hottest models. Maybe Microsoft even, does a deal with you where they train things on your behalf, like they do some white glove situation. Stuff like that's all on the table when you're Epic's size, because you can invest a couple $1 million and it's like a blink of an eye. If Notable Health has raised venture capital, it's only going to be a couple $1 million. They can't just put it all into building a relationship with Microsoft. So these two people, these two characters, this is kind of what it looks like. If you want to be in B2B SaaS, if you want to be venture backed, you're going to have to deal with the incumbents adding AI essentially onto their platform. But you will have small advantages in terms of UX. You're going to have advantages in terms of how fast you can move, how nimble you can be. And we've seen big software die. So you can definitely slay the dragon, or in this case, the woman on the left. Okay, next slide. B2C, business to consumer. So I did mention that this is mostly going to be with like a lens on venture capital. It's probably not a good idea to raise a venture-backed company with a B2C strategy. I'll explain. So if you've ever heard of a company called Jasper AI launched before ChatGPT. So they were like, when GPT-3 was sort of tough to use, very robotic, definitely, would not recommend. Jasper built a wrapper on top of GPT-3 that made it really easy to use. It's as easy as ChatGPT is today, but before ChatGPT. They did something like a record amount of revenue in 18 months. Like everybody was using Jasper for anything. They were using it to write thank you notes. They were using it to write school essays. They were using it for their jobs, to write emails, to write that little like copy that goes under things that you sell on online stores, about your t-shirt. Like my t-shirt's super comfortable and it's for relaxation, whatever. All those things Jasper was being used for. Now, what's the problem is that a product like Jasper with a B2C play has no product moat. So that's why today, after ChatGPT came out, you don't really hear about Jasper anymore. And Jasper really, really struggled to raise venture capital despite having records amount of revenue. The reason being is because we're looking at it. The second OpenAI released a better model, that had a little bit of a better UI, it was just kind of game over for Jasper. Jasper, if you go to layoffs.fyi, recently laid off a pretty decent number of people on their team. So that's why it's tough. If you want to be venture backed and you're building B2C, it's really, really hard to build a significant product moat in this category. However, if you're a bootstrap developer, B2C is a great lifestyle business choice. What that means is that the barrier for entry to an AI product has never been lower. Your tech stack is a GPT wrapper, Stripe for payments, something with like front end and deployment, Astro, Netlify. You got Supabase on the back end, and you can just set up like any little project that you charge, $5 to $10 per use. The trust for AI on consumers is so much higher than it used to be. People are marveled and impressed by AI right now. So if you just say like, oh, this is my AI solution to do like X specific task and it's $5, like you can do pretty good. It's a pretty good time to be a bootstrap dev. But that's not the discussion. We're discussing open source. Open source as a category. If you wanted to figure out what's in this category, like what companies' projects are in this category, you can go to GitHub, click on trending, repos, and I will bet you that the top 3 projects are probably AI or LLM related. And then, of course, like I mentioned, LangChain is the absolute like quintessential example of an open source AI company. They raised a $10 million seed from Benchmark, and now they have, I want to say it's like thousands plus developers who are building on top of LangChain. They're figuring out monetization, but they have users, they got money, they're going to figure it out. So open source is a great way to see if your initial idea has any traction. Developers are really great first adopters. They are willing to try new technologies. And once they love something, they like really love something. Like they're like, oh, I'm using this forever, essentially. And so it can be tough to raise venture and then be like, I'm going to pivot to open source. But if you have an open source project that just kind of goes viral, that people love, raising a venture round from that, I've heard lots of success stories and lots of firms who even specialize in funding teams and companies that have this process. So that's open source. The last one, the money makers, the absolute, the internets of today. This is where most people think, this is when people say AI, this is usually what they're thinking about. Most of these foundation models, though, have actually been around for a while, okay? Like OpenAI is not a new company. They did a lot of projects before GPT, and GPT-2 was cool. GPT-3 was cooler. GPT 3.5 set the world on fire. So, it would be tough for you to just say one day, to wake up one day and be like, I'm going to make a new foundation model. It would be so extremely resource intensive to train a new model. And there's like clear winners already. So it's pretty hard to justify that marginal benefit. So even if you could say that you can make a model better than GPT-4 by, 10%, but it would cost $1 billion to do it, there's just like not going to be venture funding for that. On the other hand, if you are Google or Facebook, then you can just train your own model. And both companies have done that. I think Google has Bard, Facebook has Llama. There's also been some exploration of different mediums, such as music and voice, instead of just text and images. For the other thing I would just like to say about foundation models is the original Transformer paper that GPT is based off of was actually written by somebody who was a recent PhD student. I think they had just finished their program. There may have been like a year or two out when they wrote about the transformer approach that ended up being what GPT is today. So a lot of these foundation models are also done by PhD scientists. Not saying that somebody who isn't one couldn't do it, but if you really, want to have a solid go at this, hopefully you have a doctorate degree on the wall. So, all right, those are the four main games that we're playing. Those are sort of the strengths, the weaknesses, how venture capital can help you, how venture capital might not help you, depending on where you are. So I guess it's time that we hear from an actual venture capitalist. This is Kyle Harrison at Contrary Capital. Full disclosure, Contrary Capital backs my startup, so I am a bit fond of them. But I do think this quote has its own legs. When we think about our products, like as founders and builders, we often think about like who's going to fund them. And I just walk you through like 4 different categories of products and being like, this is what gets funded. This is what doesn't get funded. That's because I'm a founder, right? So I'm always going to think about it in terms of there's just a limited amount of money, and I feel like there's an infinite number of things to build. But from a venture capitalist perspective, it's like the inverse. I only have this much money. It feels like there's, which companies should I fund? So Kyle at Contrary Capital compares venture to king making, or the business of literally making kings, aka I give you $1 bajillion and now your company is the most well-known, the biggest company in this area. And he compares king making to taste making, or the business of making things that people truly want. So an example of this is that king making is like Uber versus Lyft, right? They were in a battle to think who's going to be like rideshare, who's going to take rideshare, win the market, yada yada. And Uber got like a ton of venture funding. Part of the money that they got was from SoftBank, and SoftBank said to them like, I can give you money, but I can also give Lyft the same amount of money. Why should I give it to you? And the idea there is that like the venture capital person is the kingmaker. I bestow upon you the right to be king across this domain. And I think it's really interesting because if you're in venture capital, that's pretty much your perspective. But there's a ton of products that just get traction based on the concept of taste making or building things that people actually want. So there's a TikTok trend about a pickle sweater. It's a crew neck that has like pickles on it. And if you told me that a company, that a person who wants to make pickle sweaters is going to make $1 million this month, I'd be like, okay, like, I mean, sure, go pitch your idea to somebody else. But that's actually what happened. A TikTok creator was like, wouldn't it be fun if we had a crew neck that just had like different variations of pickles on it? She sold like not like $1 million worth of crew necks, $1 million worth of pickle sweaters. And that's taste making. That is the fact that people like pickle sweaters. People want pickle sweaters. That's what people want. And I kind of think that's one of those examples of you don't think about it too much in terms of like, oh, if I was going to build a product, if I was going to build something, like, you think about building something like Uber. You don't think like, oh, I can make $1 million this month by selling pickle sweaters. So I'll finally read Kyle's quote here. There just aren't enough startups to justify all that capital, venture capital. But why is that? Because 1, there aren't enough people building things that people truly want. And 2, there's only so much attention, time, energy, disposable income, corporate spend that people have to give. There is a finite amount of taste in the world. A lot of brands have thrived because they are a surprisingly big niche market, like mushroom foraging, he says, but I'm going to say pickle sweaters, that can contain a certain amount of value creation and capture. But the biggest misallocation of capital is the limited understanding of taste. What do people actually want? His quote's actually not about AI. It's a relatively recent post, but it's not about AI specifically. I just think it applies a lot when we think about AI products, because we often think like, what's something cool and neat that I can build with AI and just kind of see if people like it. That's if you're a software engineer, that's probably your perspective on things. Maybe you have ambitions to be an Uber level size, but you're often thinking about what you can build, not so much what do people actually want. So, I talked about this pickle, the pickle sweater the pickle sweater on TikTok. I could re-record. I'm not going to. Anyway, I like to compare the industry of AI, the shift in how you can create a business now that you have AI, to the concept of actually print to order shirts, print to order sweaters. So if we think about a comparison, print to order t-shirts gave, theoretically, anyone the ability to make a clothing company, in the sense that I can now print graphic tees, I can now print yada yada. It used to be really hard to make like a t-shirt company. You'd have to like find, you'd have to find some funding to find a supplier, to get pre-orders, get a designer. You got to iterate on the design. You got to like, see how it goes. You got to maybe find a store to sell it at. But now you can go to a website like Custom Ink and you can just design your shirt in the browser with no experience designing. You don't need to know how to use Adobe InDesign. You don't need to know how to use, some other tool. They have a built-in tool. It's very, very intuitive. And you can just order as many as you want. So you could just order 5. You don't need to, minimum 500 shirts anymore. You can just be like, I'll take 5 shirts, see if they sell. So in this metaphor, AI is like that t-shirt, is a t-shirt printing ability. You can still, theoretically, you can print anything. The AI is, your oyster. You can make anything. And that is a little bit of a trap, but also still true, because in the world of make anything, lots of t-shirt businesses don't work. Lots of t-shirt things, people are like, yeah, I mean, it's a nice t-shirt, but like, I'm not going to pay $50 for this t-shirt. But this like $100 pickle crew neck went totally viral. And there was a small group, but bigger than you thought, group of people who loved it so much that in total, they spent $1 million that month on pickle sweatshirts. So with AI, you're looking at kind of the same thing. Like you can now technically build whatever you want, but it's really not about what you want. It's about what other people want. And that's kind of where I want to leave the thought for today. We don't know what people want until we start making things, but we shouldn't make things that people don't necessarily want. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. And people don't really want a larger language model. They want a language model that understands them with less effort. Or maybe they don't want a model to understand them at all. Maybe the rise of AI means people that want more time in nature, right? Like maybe the rise of all this technology means that people want more counterculture. And that really did happen. There was multiple counterculture waves in America that were super meaningful in terms of what companies rose to prominence. Counterculture waves could mean a bunch of low tech businesses. But either way, whatever happens, it's that this future that's going to happen shortly after AI, it will be made by the people who listen to what people actually want. So that's the game. Thank you for playing. I hope my allegory was somewhat interesting to you. If it was, you can find me on these platforms. I am on LinkedIn. I'm on the Bird, formerly X, Twitter app. I'm also on TikTok if you want to see me do some skits on TikTok. So find me there. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.